Yo, what is up everybody, and welcome back to another Madden 17 online game. Here are the I'm kidding. We already did the Panthers. It's the Cincinnati Bengals that we're covering today for the 32-team preview series for the upcoming NFL season. And last year, things did not go too well in Cincinnati. They did not go according to plan. The Bengals have been, for the past 5 or 6 years, one of the more consistent teams in the AFC, battling for a playoff spot. But last year, they definitely fell back a little bit. That Week 1 game against the New York Jets, their season opener, really defined their season. You know, no Tyler Eifert to start things off. Andy Dalton got sacked 500 times, and they lost by 1 point in a close game to the New York Jets. And knowing how not so good the Jets ended up being, you know, it definitely hurts even more knowing the fact that they lost that game. And nothing was really in sync for the Bengals last season. You know, their first-round pick, William Jackson, missed the entire season. Eifert and A.J. Green were out in and out the lineup. Eifert got injured in the Pro Bowl the previous year, so that's why he missed the first half of last season. And then, on top of that, once Eifert finally comes back, A.J. Green gets hurt. Like, come on, man. They just did not go right for the Bengals. So now we fast forward to this season. Can the Bengals turn things around, or have they really just passed their time? Have they just, you know, lost touch with the NFL and they got to try to, you know, rejuvenate themselves and recuperate and try to take a year or two off before they make a run at the playoffs again, or is this year the year? Well, looking at the offensive side of football, you know, it depends on what positions you look at. Things look pretty good or pretty bad. The offensive line might be maybe the worst unit in the NFL. It might actually be the worst offensive line in the NFL. So the 2015 draft, the Bengals doubled down on tackle position. They drafted Jake Fisher and Aboye. I'm not going to really try to pronounce his name, but they took those two guys in the first 2 rounds of the 2015 draft. Before that, they had Whitworth, and they had Andre Smith, and I believe it was Andre Smith his name was, and those guys were solid tackles for the Bengals for years, especially Whitworth. Smith was kind of falling off, but Whitworth, you know, still is solid, and you know, he's gone now. Smith is gone, and now they have these two guys who both do not look too good, and both are about to be starting tackles in the NFL. So at least one of those guys has to step up. That is looking pretty disastrous. Russell Bodine's their center. They drafted him a couple years ago, and he's been below average to average for his entire career. They got Quinn Bowling, who's been okay, and I don't even know who the hell plays right guard for them right there, or the other position that's open. So it's not looking good. But when you look at the weapons that they have at the skill positions, this is a stacked team in that sense. First of all, A.J. Green and Tyler Eifert. That's big. Those are big-time players. Look at A.J. Green catching that ball in this game. One of the few times you hear me mention a game, something that happens in a Madden game while we're doing this. But you got A.J. Green. You got John Ross, drafted with the first-round pick this year. Everybody knows John Ross for his 40 time, and that's cool and all, but we got to see what he does on the field. And, I mean, there's no way he got drafted in the top 10 in the NFL draft just purely based on speed, right? Like, there's got to be something that the Bengals saw that, hey, John Ross can be really good. So hopefully they're right about that, and if they are, you have John Ross. You got Tyler Boyd, who was drafted in the 2nd round last year, and I'm personally a fan of Tyler Boyd. I think that, you know, if he gets more playing time this year, he could be a solid NFL receiver. I don't know about superstar or anything like that, but I think Tyler Boyd could be a solid NFL receiver. He could, you know, be a part of a pretty elite passing offense for the Cincinnati Bengals if they get things right. And then they also have Brandon LaFell. So they're pretty much 4 deep at the wide receiver spot. And then the running back spot, I mean, it depends on what happens with Giovanni Bernard. They might only be 2 deep at that spot, maybe 3 deep, depending on Bernard coming back from the ACL injury. But they have Jeremy Hill, and then they have potentially Jeremy Hill's future replacement in Joe Mixon, the very controversial running back who some people would rather have seen him get undrafted. But he did get drafted by the Bengals in the 2nd round out of Oklahoma. We all know his story. No need to go over in the video. As far as a football player, I mean, that's what the Bengals drafted him for. If he's on the field to play football and he does it well, you know, I mean, we'll have to see how well the Bengals can actually run the football behind that atrocious offensive line, because it was kind of below average last year, and you can tell why, because the unit that Jeremy Hill was running behind. But I mean, maybe Joe Mixon can spice things up. We'll see what can happen. But I mean, their passing attack looks pretty promising. It's just that, you know, they gotta avoid those sacks. They were one of the most sacked teams in the NFL last year. You don't want to get sacked too much, because then Andy Dalton gets hurt. I mean, they have AJ McCarron, who was a pretty quality backup a couple of seasons ago, but I mean, you don't want to get your franchise quarterback hurt. And Dalton, You know, as much as people may have questions about him and the fact that he's not like a top 5 quarterback, he is a franchise quarterback in NFL standards where, you know, he can get the job done for a team, especially if he has a great defense behind him. But the Bengals don't exactly have a great defense. It's an average defense. Their secondary is extremely average. I mentioned William Jackson missed the entire last season of his rookie year, torn pectoral. So if he comes back, he can hopefully, you know, spice up that secondary a little bit. Adam Jones, you know, we got to see how much longer he can play at this level. Drake Kirkpatrick. I like Drake Kirkpatrick. I don't love Drake Kirkpatrick. He's okay. But, you know, Drake Kirkpatrick probably best served as your second or third best cornerback. And then they got Dennard, who hasn't really been too great. In their secondary, they got Iloka and Sean Williams. They've been back there, especially Iloka the past couple of seasons. And you know, it's just extremely average. Those aren't bad safeties, but, I mean, you definitely would rather have Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor, you know what I mean? But, you know, having those guys back there is just, you know, it's I believe it was the Houston Texans we were going over, you know, an extremely average secondary. It's kind of like that. Thankfully, their front seven, you know, I mean, their linebacking core is pretty great with Vontaze Burfict and Vincent Ray. Definitely two of the better inside linebackers to have in the NFL. And they got good pass rushers, but they kind of lack depth, and they're hoping that they hit on something during the draft this year, because they drafted a couple of pass rushers in Jordan Willis and Carl Lawson in the 3rd and 4th round, so maybe one of those guys step up. But, I mean, they got Carlos Dunlap, they got Geno Atkins, and those are big-time names to be rushing the passer, but you know, they really lack depth as far as sending multiple guys at the quarterback, so we'll see if they hit on something in the draft. And lately, they've been drafting offensive heavy a lot in these drafts. Besides William Jackson in the 1st round last year, you know, we mentioned the tackle thing in 2015, and Eifert was taken in the 1st round in 2013. So the Bengals have kind of lost touch with their defense a little bit, and it could potentially cause a regression for the Bengals defense. Like I said, not too much depth on this team. Maybe an injury or two happens, and it can really bring this Bengals team apart. The one thing to mention about the Bengals is that I found pretty interesting is they were tied for second, I should say, with interceptions last season. So you wouldn't really expect that from this Bengals secondary, but they were a ball-hawking secondary because they weren't really up there in takeaways. It's just that they didn't get a lot of fumbles. That's the main reason why, but they got a lot of interceptions, so the Bengals can continue that. And another thing to mention about the Cincinnati Bengals, I don't really talk too much about, you know, coordinators and stuff like that. I feel like that's just way too in-depth for us to talk about with only like 10 minutes to talk about per team, but the Bengals have lost a lot of quality coordinators the last couple of seasons. They lost Mike Zimmer, they lost Hugh Jackson, they lost Jay Gruden. You know, a bunch of big-time guys that went on to be NFL head coaches. So, you know, eventually that's going to hurt your team. But I think the Bengals, nonetheless, have a good enough squad and potentially a good enough offense despite the offensive line to go maybe 9-7 this season. And I think they'll be contending for a wildcard spot. I don't think they can win the division this season, but I think the Bengals will be a wildcard team this year. I really, you know, believe that the defense can hold up just enough, in the offense, you know, I just, you know, last year when you look at they really weren't too as bad as their record showed last year. It wasn't really like they were getting blown out. They just lost a lot of close games, and they could turn that around, and, you know, they can definitely make a playoff push. So that's my prediction on the Cincinnati Bengals. One more thing to mention with the Cincinnati Bengals is who the hell is the kicker? I guess it's Randy Bullock. I don't know how that's going to work out. The Bengals for the last couple of years have had Nugent, and that's been kind of a disaster, especially in late game situations like the overtime game against the Redskins that they tied last year. The Bengals have been a couple of ties the last couple of years. So we'll see, you know, if they can go 9-7 like I said, or they go 8-7-1. But leave a like in the video if you guys enjoyed it. Bengals, you guys are like who day, right? I think you guys are who day. What do you guys feeling this season? You guys think you guys can make that playoff push like I said? Do we feel like the Bengals might miss out to other teams in the AFC in that wildcard spot? Or can they even win the division? What are you guys thinking? Leave a like if you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys next time.